The city's elite flocked to the Central Park Bistro, nestled between rows of neatly trimmed hedges and the soothing hum of a nearby fountain. It was lunchtime, and the restaurant was alive with energy. Waiters in sleek uniforms glided between tables, serving gourmet meals and pouring coffee. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the fragrance of blooming flowers. For most patrons, it was just another ordinary day in this sanctuary of luxury. At a prime table near the window sat Elliot Harper, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth and influence. Having built his fortune from humble beginnings in the tech industry, he had expanded into ventures that seemed impossible to most. At 68, he exuded the kind of confidence that came only with years of dominance in both the business world and beyond. His tailored suit and diamond-studded watch reflected a life of comfort and excess. But despite his success, today something felt different. Across from him sat his second wife, Chloe, who at 32 was almost half his age. She was stunningly beautiful, with striking blonde hair and eyes that gleamed like polished glass. Her perfectly manicured appearance, her elegant dress, and the diamond necklace that lay delicately on her collarbone was the picture of grace. But her smile, though dazzling, did not quite reach her eyes. She was absorbed in her phone, her attention drifting elsewhere. Unbeknownst to the couple, just outside the bistro's patio, a young boy watched them intently. He was skinny, his ragged clothes barely clinging to his frame. His dark eyes scanned the tables, searching for any sign of food or money he could take advantage of. This boy, named Leo, was a familiar face in the area. He had no home, no place to go, and was constantly on the outskirts of people's lives, never fully part of the world he observed. Inside, Elliot adjusted his glasses slowly, his gaze drifting toward the menu in front of him. He seemed distracted, though Chloe didn't notice, too engrossed in her phone. Leo's stomach growled loudly, and he edged closer to the railing, his eyes fixed on the bowl of soup in front of Elliot. The meal before him was something Leo could only dream of. A perfect bowl of steaming soup, a slice of fresh bread, and a glass of sparkling water. Just as Leo was about to look away, he noticed something strange. Chloe had slipped her hand into her designer purse, pulling out a tiny vial, almost unnoticed. With a quick flick of her wrist, she poured something into Elliot's soup, a clear liquid that disappeared as soon as it hit the surface. Leo's heart raced. He couldn't understand why someone would do that, but the unease in his chest told him it was wrong. Leo didn't know why, but he had to act. His instincts told him something terrible was about to happen. He had seen enough in his short life to recognize when danger loomed. His hands clenched into fists as he stood behind the railing, watching the couple. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as he watched Elliot pick up his spoon, his hand slightly trembling. "Don't eat that," Leo shouted, his voice cracking but filled with urgency. The entire restaurant seemed to stop. Conversations halted, and the clink of silverware fell silent. Every patron turned their attention to the young boy standing at the railing, his voice echoing across the quiet space. Elliot froze, his spoon hovering just inches from his lips. His wide eyes locked onto Leo, and for a brief moment, he seemed to question whether he had heard correctly. Chloe whipped around in her chair, her face contorting into a snarl. "What did you just say?" Chloe demanded, her voice sharp and venomous. Leo didn't back down. His hands shook, but his voice was steady as he repeated himself. "I saw her. She put something in your food. Don't eat it." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one moved. Elliot looked from Leo to Chloe, his eyes narrowing as doubt crept into his expression. "Chloe, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Chloe's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Don't listen to him, Elliot," she said, her tone dismissive. "He's just a street kid. He's probably hungry or wants some money." Leo felt the weight of the entire room on him. His instincts were screaming that time was running out. "I'm not lying. She put something in your soup." "You can smell it if you don't believe me," Leo insisted. His voice was louder now, shaking with a mix of fear and urgency. Elliot hesitated, his gaze flicking from his soup to Chloe, who was now visibly nervous, her eyes darting to the bowl as if she wished she could erase the evidence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then quietly, Elliot put his spoon down. "Chloe," he said softly, "what did you put in my food?" Chloe's composure cracked. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "You little liar!" she screamed, her voice a dangerous hiss. "How dare you accuse me like this? You have no right to be here." Leo stood firm, his heart racing, but his resolve unwavering. "I saw what she did. You have to believe me." His voice wavered but stayed strong. He looked directly at Elliot, his eyes pleading for the truth to be recognized. The room grew tense, and for a moment it felt as if the entire world had stopped spinning. Leo's words hung in the air like a silent storm. Elliot turned his gaze back to Chloe, his expression one of growing suspicion. Chloe's facade was starting to crumble, the mask of composure slipping. Chloe crossed her arms and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You really think I'd poison my own husband?" she scoffed. "Look at him," she gestured to Elliot. "He's just a kid. He probably wants attention, or worse, money." Her words were venomous, but they were losing their bite. But Leo didn't flinch. He felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "She put something in your food. If you don't believe me, test it," he urged, his voice growing more insistent. "You have the resources to find out. Don't ignore this." The air in the restaurant felt thick with tension, the murmurs of the other patrons growing louder. Some were looking at Chloe with suspicion, while others eyed Leo with disbelief. No one seemed to know how to react to the unfolding drama. Finally, Elliot stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. He looked down at his wife, his eyes cold. "Chloe," he said, his voice calm but filled with quiet fury. "What did you do?" Chloe's face turned pale, and she took an involuntary step back. The perfect control persona she had so carefully crafted shattered before her eyes. I didn't do anything," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Leo, watching her, could see the cracks forming. "If you didn't do anything, why are you so nervous?" he challenged, his voice still steady. "If you're innocent, you should be calm, but you're not." Elliot, despite his shock, seemed to be coming to a realization. His eyes narrowed and his hands clenched into fists. The truth was dawning on him, and he could no longer ignore the evidence right in front of him. The tension in the air was palpable as Elliot turned back to Chloe. "I want the truth," he said, his voice low but filled with finality. "What did you do to my food?" Chloe's composure shattered entirely. Her eyes flicked nervously to the bowl of soup, then to the crowd that was now watching her every move. I didn't mean to." She trailed off, her voice faltering. Elliot's face hardened. "You didn't mean to. You poisoned me. You tried to kill me," he said with a cold fury, his voice rising. The crowd was now whispering furiously, some clearly appalled, others too shocked to speak. The room was silent as the gravity of the moment settled in. Chloe, now visibly shaking, took a few steps back, trying to distance herself from the scene. She glanced nervously toward the door, as if contemplating fleeing. The silence stretched, and for a moment the only sound was the soft clinking of silverware and the faint hum of conversation from distant tables. Elliot's eyes locked onto Chloe, his gaze unwavering. Chloe took another shaky step backward, her chest rising and falling rapidly with each breath. She knew she had been caught. The game was up. "You don't understand," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "I had no choice. He was going to ruin everything. I had to do something." Elliot's fist clenched tighter. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice now a low growl. "What did you mean by that? Who was going to ruin everything?" Chloe's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. The truth was out, and there was no hiding from it now. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "It's not what you think," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "I didn't want it to end like this. I was trying to protect us. To protect you." Elliot shook his head in disbelief. "Protect me? By poisoning me? What kind of protection is that?" His voice was filled with rage now, but there was also a deep sadness in his eyes. Leo, watching from the sidelines, finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "This isn't about protecting anyone, Chloe. This is about control. You couldn't stand the idea of losing everything you built, and you were willing to do anything to keep it." Chloe's face flushed, and she clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. You don't know anything about me, she spat, her words laced with venom. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. Elliot took a step forward, his eyes never leaving her face. Sacrifices? You think poisoning me is some kind of sacrifice? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. Chloe's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. It wasn't just about you, she admitted, her voice quieter now. I couldn't let everything fall apart. I couldn't lose control. Elliot's gaze softened, a flicker of something like pity crossing his face. But at what cost, Chloe? He asked. How far were you willing to go? What's left of the person I thought I knew? The room fell completely silent again. Even the other patrons, who had been whispering amongst themselves, were now staring at the scene in disbelief. Chloe's entire life, her carefully constructed facade, was crumbling before her eyes. Chloe took a deep breath, finally meeting Elliot's eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't want this. I never wanted it to get this far. Elliot stood still, processing her words. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but the one thing that kept rising to the surface was the same question. Why? For a long moment, Elliot said nothing. The weight of Chloe's confession hung in the air like a thick fog. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but the storm inside his mind had calmed just enough to let him think. You're right about one thing, he finally spoke, his voice quieter now. You didn't want this to happen, but you still let it. Chloe flinched at his words, but she didn't interrupt. She knew he was right. The truth was too raw, too painful. You wanted control so badly, Chloe, Elliot continued, his voice steady. But in the end, control over others is an illusion. You can't manipulate people and expect them to stay the same. Sooner or later, they'll see through you. Chloe took a shaky breath, her hands trembling at her sides. She felt exposed now, as if every layer of defense she had built was crumbling to dust. I didn't think anyone would ever see through me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I thought I could keep it all under control. Leo, still standing by the side, crossed his arms. You were always playing a dangerous game, Chloe. You never once stopped to think about what would happen if you lost. The tension in the air was palpable. Chloe's carefully constructed world was crashing down, and there was no escape this time. She had been caught, and the consequences were unavoidable. Chloe finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. Elliot took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't sure if he was ready to forgive her, but there was something in her words that made him hesitate. Could he still find it in himself to forgive someone who had betrayed him so completely? I don't know if I can forgive you, Chloe, Elliot finally said, his voice quiet but firm. What you did, it was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. But you have to live with that now. You'll have to face the consequences. Chloe's face twisted in pain, but she said nothing. She knew it was true. There was nothing she could say to change what had happened. Just then, the sound of sirens grew louder. Police officers were closing in. Chloe's body tensed. She knew what was coming. It wasn't just the end of her game. It was the end of her freedom. I need to talk to the police, Elliot said, his voice steady but cold. They'll need to know everything. You can't keep running away from the truth. As the police entered, Chloe's composure cracked completely. She tried to stand tall, but her facade was now a hollow shell. She was done. There was no more pretending. The officers approached the table, their eyes scanning the scene. Chloe's chest rose and fell with each breath, but she didn't speak. Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions, one of the officers said. His voice was firm, but there was no malice in it. He was just doing his job. Chloe swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't answer immediately, but there was no point in denying it anymore. The truth was out, and she had nowhere to hide. Chloe remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel the weight of the officer's gaze on her, but there was nothing left for her to say. She was no longer the woman in control. She was just a woman who had lost everything. Elliot stepped back as the officers moved forward. He had seen enough. This wasn't his battle anymore. Chloe had made her choices, and now she had to face them. One of the officers turned to Elliot. Mr. Harper, can you please step outside? We'll need to ask you a few questions as well. Elliot nodded, his heart heavy with everything that had transpired. He had known this moment would come, but facing it was still harder than he had imagined. As he walked out of the room, he stole one last glance at Chloe. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She didn't look like the woman he once knew. Outside, the cold air hit him like a wave. Elliot paused, taking in a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. The weight of what he had learned about Chloe, about everything, was suffocating. He sat down on a bench, staring blankly ahead. Leo joined him moments later, sitting down silently beside him. There was no need for words. Both of them knew that Chloe's game had come to an end. "You okay?" Leo asked softly after a while. Elliot didn't respond right away. He just looked at Leo, his face a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I don't know what's worse," he finally muttered, his voice hoarse. "The fact that I knew what she was capable of, or that I let myself get caught up in it all." Leo exhaled slowly, thinking about his next words. "Sometimes the hardest thing to admit is that we're all human," he said, his tone thoughtful. "We all make mistakes. It's what you do with those mistakes that matters in the end." Elliot nodded slowly, absorbing Leo's words. He hadn't expected this kind of comfort, but in a way, it made sense. He had been so consumed by his anger, by his betrayal, that he had forgotten the part where people were allowed to be imperfect. The door to the building opened, and one of the officers stepped out. "Mr. Harper, the detectives are ready to speak with you now." Elliot stood up, straightening his jacket. He gave Leo one last look, a silent acknowledgement that things were about to change. "I'll be fine," Elliot said, his voice steady. "I just need to face the truth now." Leo gave him a brief nod. "I'm here if you need me." Elliot turned and walked toward the door, his mind racing. What would he learn in the next few hours? What consequences would Chloe face? Would he ever be able to move past this? The questions loomed over him like a heavy cloud, but for now he had no answers. He just had to take the next step. Elliot entered the dimly lit room where the detectives were waiting. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. The room was cold, the kind of cold that made everything feel distant, detached. One of the detectives, a middle-aged man with a stern face, gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Harper, thank you for your patience. We need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Miss Collins." Elliot sat down, his hands clenched in his lap. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he had to do it. For closure, for the truth. "We have reason to believe that Chloe Collins has been involved in several illegal activities," the detective continued, pulling out a file from the desk and opening it. "Do you know anything about her dealings, her connections?" Elliot paused, his mind racing. He couldn't deny that Chloe had been involved in things he hadn't fully understood. But was it enough to bring her down? He thought about the time they had spent together, the moments that had felt so real. Could all of that be a lie? I don't know everything," Elliot began, his voice faltering. "But I do know she wasn't the person she appeared to be." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I think she used me, manipulated me." The detective nodded, his face impassive. "That's consistent with what we've gathered so far. But we need more, Mr. Harper. We need details. Anything you can provide could help." Elliot leaned back in his chair, trying to find the right words. "She was always so secretive. I never knew where she went, what she was doing when we weren't together." His mind flashed to the late nights, the unexplained absences. "But I do remember one thing. She had a contact, someone she would meet in secret. I never got a name, but she was always nervous about it." The detective's eyes narrowed. "A contact, you say? Do you know where these meetings took place?" Elliot shook his head, frustration creeping in. "Number. She never told me, but it was always at night, always somewhere quiet, away from people." "Do you think she was involved in something dangerous?" The detective pressed, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Elliot hesitated, memories flashing before him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm starting to think she was part of something much bigger than I realized." The detective stood up, nodding slowly. "That's very helpful, Mr. Harper. We'll need to investigate this contact further. Thank you for your cooperation." As Elliot walked out of the room, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Chloe had been hiding so much from him, and he had never even suspected it. The woman he thought he knew had been living a double life. one filled with danger and secrets. He glanced at his phone, seeing a message from Leo. "You okay? Need to talk?" Elliot sighed, staring at the screen for a moment before typing his reply. "I don't know, man, but I'm getting closer to the truth." As he put his phone away, Elliot realized that he wasn't just uncovering the truth about Chloe. He was also learning about himself, about the choices he had made, and how they had led him to this point. He had to face the consequences of those choices. And no matter how hard it was, he couldn't turn back now. Elliot sat in his car, staring at the message from Leo on his phone. The weight of what he had just learned about Chloe was almost too much to bear. His mind kept spinning with questions. How deep was she into this? What kind of trouble had she really gotten herself into? As he drove, the city streets blurred in the background. His destination was clear now. He had to find that contact, the one Chloe had been so secretive about. But how? Where could he even begin? Elliot decided to start by going through Chloe's things. Maybe there was something he missed, a clue, a piece of information that could point him in the right direction. When he arrived at her apartment, it felt like he was stepping into a different world. The place was neatly kept, almost unnaturally so. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had been here recently. But something felt off. He started searching through her desk, rifling through papers, looking for anything that seemed out of place. After a few minutes, he found it, a small notebook hidden behind a stack of old bills. Opening it carefully, he saw that it was filled with cryptic notes, names, and numbers. One name stood out, Victor Sullivan. There was an address next to it, followed by a time, 11 p.m. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. This was the lead he had been looking for. He quickly took a photo of the page and sent it to Leo with a short message. "I think I found the guy." After sending the message, he grabbed his jacket and headed out of the apartment. The night was falling, and with it, a sense of urgency. He needed to get to Victor before Chloe's mysterious network realized he was onto them. The address led him to a rundown part of the city, a neighborhood that looked like it hadn't seen the light of day in years. The buildings were old, covered in grime, and the streets were empty, save for a few stray cats and a dim streetlight flickering in the distance. Elliot parked his car and walked the rest of the way. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached a dilapidated building. He could feel that something wasn't right, that he was being watched. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He was about to confront a person who might hold the answers he needed, but he had no idea how dangerous this encounter could be. As he knocked on the door, the sound echoed through the empty alley. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing a man with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "You're late," the man said flatly. "I'm here to talk about Chloe," Elliot said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to know what's going on. I need answers." The man's eyes narrowed as he sized Elliot up. "You're not ready for this, kid," he said with a smirk. "But since you're here, you'd better come inside. We have a lot to discuss." Elliot took a deep breath and stepped inside, knowing that his life was about to change forever. Inside the dimly lit room, Elliot could feel the tension in the air. The man who had introduced himself as Victor closed the door behind him with a slow, deliberate motion. The walls were covered with old posters and newspaper clippings, some of which seemed to relate to Chloe. "You're Chloe's friend, aren't you?" Victor's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it. "She's gotten herself into quite a mess. I warned her not to get involved." Elliot didn't flinch. "What exactly did you warn her about?" he asked, trying to keep his cool. "Why didn't she listen?" Victor chuckled darkly. "You think she would have listened if she knew what she was really getting into? You think any of us do? This isn't some game, kid. It's real. And she—" He paused, glancing around the room, as though making sure no one else was listening. "She crossed a line." "What line?" Elliot pressed, leaning in slightly. He was done with vague answers. He needed the truth. Victor sighed, his eyes hardening. "She got too close to something she didn't understand. People, organizations, things that make the government nervous. When you mess with that kind of power, there's no turning back." Elliot's mind raced. "You're saying Chloe got involved with dangerous people? What kind of power are we talking about?" Victor stood up, walking to a small table cluttered with papers. He picked up a folder, flipping it open to reveal a series of photos. Some of them were blurry, others were clearer. Images of Chloe in places Elliot had never seen before. She was talking to people who looked dangerous. These are from her last few meetings, Victor said. She was trying to get information about a covert operation. It's not just some criminal group. There are bigger forces at play here. Elliot took a step back, his mind reeling. A covert operation? What do you mean? What's going on? Victor's face hardened, the joking demeanor gone. You need to understand, kid. There are things happening here that go beyond your comprehension. Chloe didn't just walk into this. She was targeted. Someone wanted her involved. Someone who has enough influence to make people disappear. Elliot's stomach churned. What do you mean, make people disappear? He took another step back, the weight of the words sinking in. Are you telling me Chloe is in danger? Victor's eyes narrowed. I'm telling you, kid, she's in a lot of trouble. And if you want to help her, you need to make a choice. Because the people involved in this, they don't play by the rules. Elliot clenched his fists. What do I need to do? Victor studied him for a moment, as if weighing his decision. Then he nodded. Meet me tomorrow night. I'll give you the full details. But be ready, it's not going to be easy. Elliot nodded, feeling the gravity of the situation sink in. I'm ready. As he left the room, the door creaked shut behind him. The weight of what lay ahead settled over him like a dark cloud. Chloe's fate was now intertwined with his own, and he wasn't sure what that meant for either of them. But there was no turning back now.